And hybridization doesn't even account for any of these four. So these are just buildups of genetic diversity in different isolated groups, or even emerging within a same group.
Okay, well, let me ask you a simple question then. Does this buildup of genetic diversity have any limits?
What limits would you propose? What limits might you be thinking of?
Okay, let's take limits on size as an example. Is there any do you believe there's a limit to the size of dogs? Is it possible for dogs to ever become as big as a blue whale? There are animals as big as a blue whale, like the blue whale. So is it possible for an animal, is there a limit on size? Could you get a dog as big as Texas?
Godzilla is not possible, for example.
Very good, very good. So there are limits to this variation.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, so there are what you're telling me is that there are structural limits imposed by gravity, but not actually by biodiversity. So there's no limit to biodiversity that you've yet given, only structural limitations according to physics, perhaps.
Well, no, okay, well, correct. Now, why don't we get dogs as big as elephants? Because
of structural difficulties. When they exceed 200 pounds, they are beyond their ability to withstand to grow any larger because of the structure they already have. They have to adapt a more improved structure in order to exceed that size. And the same thing goes with the reason the dinosaurs were so big was because they had a system already built in that allowed that to happen without a backlash. They had avian respiration, so they had hollow bones that they could breathe through, which made them far more energetic and powerful than we are. So that dinosaurs and mammals of equal mass, the dinosaur will excel because it'll be lighter and faster and stronger.
Well, you said the dog is limited and can't become as big as an elephant. There are animals as big as an elephant. It's called an elephant.
There are animals that are as big as an elephant, but they have to, as I just said, and I'm going to have to repeat again, the dog would then have to have a new adaptation to account for the larger size, because we also know bears come from dogs, and bears they don't come from dogs, they come from the common ancestor, but bears are genetically linked to dogs, and bears have excessive size. They don't have the digigrade gait and the hyper speed that dogs have, different derivations from the commonality.
Well, in your religion, they're different.
They're not. It's not a religion because it's not faith-based, and it's not a belief system. And it doesn't require belief. It doesn't teach belief. It discourages belief in favor of critical analysis and peer review.
Okay, well, Aron, bears produce bears, dogs produce dogs. You say they came from a common ancestor. That is a belief. We never observed that.
Why is it a belief to see a genetic link? If you've got evidence that shows the genetics are there, that dogs and bears and seals and mustelids are all canoidean carnivores, and they're all genetically linked. If you can do a parental test using the genetics, the same as you say a Maury Povich, you are the father. We show the genetic link. There is the evidence, not faith like you have, not just going on a book of old fables like you have. We have actual genetic evidence to confirm this.
So you have genetic evidence that a dog and a bear are related, and what is that evidence exactly? Because they have similar DNA?
Told you.
No, you didn't. You said no. You said there's the word genetics is not. I want to be specific. What exactly makes you think that something was the father? You are the father of the bear and the dog. What exactly would make you think that? What part of the DNA structure? Is it the number of chromosomes? Is it the length of the chromosomes? Is it the arrangement of CATG? Exactly what is this evidence that you're claiming is evidence for this ancestry, the parental aspect of the ancestor of dog and wolf, or dog and bear?
I explained this in a series I explained this in a video called Caniform Carnivore Cladogram Construction. I like alliteration. I can't help it. And there's a backup to this that also covers the cat side of the family tree. And these are in a series of videos, a five video series called Falsifying Phylogeny, which explains a number of other evolutionary principles, including the evolutionary laws that I just mentioned.
Well, can you just give me a 2-minute summary here? What is your reason?
It is, as I just explained, and I'm repeating the explanation again. It's just like doing a parental test where you're matching the commonality to see whether this person is the father or that person is the father. You're just extrapolating further back.
And I'll ask you again, maybe you'll get it this time. What exactly are you looking at to determine the parental?
I answered twice. I will answer a third time. Maybe you will be the one to get it this time, as I had it since the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we are just like a parental paternity test, where you're using a genetic mashup, right? Codon for codon, right? You're looking for the commonality between these genetic lines, genetic lineages. You're also looking at wherever there are applicable ERVs and such. Whatever, I can't remember the other term, whatever other commonalities take factor in genetic comparison. You're doing a genome sequence comparison to identify the ancestry, just like you would trace whether, you are Danish in ancestry or Jamaican or what have you. It's the same concept.
So you're saying someone did a genome sequencing of a dog and a bear and found out that they have a common ancestor based on
Not just
ERVs?
someone, lots of people. Because the thing about science is that it has to be peer reviewed, which means that somebody does these tests and say, okay, I did these tests, and then other people have to go back and duplicate those tests and confirm that they get similar results, or they can confirm that this is what actually happens.
So you mentioned we should start with no belief whatsoever and just look at the evidence. Let's assume that we do study the bear and the dog and find out they have similar ERVs, they have similar genetic sequences. What then would you conclude from that? Would you consider the possibility that maybe the same author wrote the code?
The possibility, key word. Once again, I repeat, and I have to do that a lot here, that in order to establish whether there is a possibility, we have to show a precedent or a parallel or a verified phenomenon indicating that that possibility exists. And we have had, by your own admission, we have had speciation occur. We have seen evolution happening in real time. Not just in the fossil record, but also in the lab, live. So we know it occurs. And then we look at the characters of the simple physical characteristics. What the hell? You look between the description of bears and of dogs, and then we look in the fossil record. We also find bear dogs and dog bears. Literally, seriously. We find bear dogs and dog bears, both. And then we have common ancestors basal to each that would their physiology looks a little bit more like a Wolverine, but basically it's the common ancestor where it's still plantigrade, still like a dog, or it's still plantigrade like a bear, but still has a long tail like a dog.
Okay.
So we have a number of different facts. We have a body of different types of evidence, different bodies of evidence that all concord with each other. And you want me to consider the possibility, as yet unestablished, that a magic imaginary man went poof.
All right, so let's try to get this a little back on track a little bit. So, Aron, you're saying there's a consilience of all these different branches of not just genetics, not just codons, not just ERVs, but comparative homologies and anatomy and a whole bunch of different other things. And Kent's basically saying, forget all that. There's a probability or possibility that it could be a common designer. That's
exactly.
Basically
so in the description where he asked for my two items of evidence for, or my two best examples of evidence for evolution, I gave phylogenetics, which I've been trying to explain, and he's actually been explaining, but he doesn't understand that that is what he's explaining. And then the other thing, which is that we actually know things to be true, demonstrably, verifiably true about evolution, where nobody knows anything at all about any magic imaginary designer. There is literally no possibility to consider, because he can't even show me a kind, which would have to be the most basic thing any creationist should cough up at the onset before we even talk about this. If you want to talk about all animals being created, you'd have to show me which ones are the ones that are created. If you're going to accept that some degree of phylogeny applies, where's the cutoff point? That's what I'm asking. That's what the phylogeny challenge is.
Yeah, make sure Kent is able to address this specifically and give him equal time on this. So Kent, he's kind of asking you, what was the original kind as compared to what we know to be speciation events? So you're agreeing that speciation occurs. So can you differentiate between, for us, what we know to be speciation, because you agree speciation occurs, to the original created kinds that were not derivated from some kind of original other species? So what are the original kinds that you're suggesting exist that supersede all the evidences that Aron is providing for us? And we'll give you plenty of time to speak on this. So, Aron, let him actually go on this, please.
Thank you. I think I've answered it 5 or 6 times, but if they're able to bring forth, according to Genesis chapter 1, they're the same kind. Now, have they diversified? He keeps mixing the word species and kind. I don't use that word species very often because it's a flexible term. I think a dog and a wolf are different species, as I mentioned, yet they're the same kind of animal. There are 200 species of squirrels. They're probably the same kind of animal. There are 1,100 species of bats. They're probably the same kind of animal, called a bat. But if you want to look at the similarities, I have in front of me an article from, let's see, where was this published? Farm and Garden magazine, Monday, August 15, 2005, about they deciphered the DNA of rice. And they said fruit flies have 13,600 genes in their DNA code. The humans have 20 to 25,000 genes. Rice has 37,544, and maize has 50,000. So we could make a phylogenetic tree, and if we live long enough, we're all going to be turned into maize, and the cows can eat us here. So I think it's obvious that rice and humans and flies are different kinds. And there's a place called baraminology.com from the Hebrew word baramin, about kind, that is so far as I think they've said there are probably about 7,000 or 8,000 kinds of animals on land that breathe air. This would not include insects or fish that didn't have to go on the ark. About 7,000 kinds of animals probably went on Noah's ark. Some say even less than that, but I don't know. Let's just pick that number and say 7,000 to 8,000 is a reasonable number of kinds of original animals that had to come off the ark. A fish would do just fine in the flood. But I think that everybody should recognize that they're limited. I don't know exactly where the limit is, but we talked about the dog. Can they become as big as an elephant? No, but there are elephants that are as big as an elephant, and they certainly can't become as big as Texas. So certainly there are limits to the variations within the kind. There are sometimes physical limits because of bone structure, et cetera, or the percentage of oxygen in the air. Obviously, there were gigantic insects on this planet. I mean, 52-inch dragonfly fossils have been found. If you want to talk about the fossil record, they talk about 2-foot grasshoppers that they couldn't survive. They couldn't breathe today because they breathe through spiracles in their skin. They don't have a lung system like we do. So we could talk about fossils if you'd like. I have quite a large collection of fossils. I think all the fossils indicate something was very different on this planet, and I would take this to be before the flood came, and nearly all the fossils probably formed because of one big flood event. So my definition of kind, and he keeps intermixing the word species, and please don't do that. If they can bring forth, they're the same kind. There's one kind of animal called a squirrel. There are now 200 species of squirrels. There's one kind of animal called a bat. There are now 1,100 species of bats. There are 13 species of panther. Okay, but they're still a cat. They're still the same kind of animal, and they probably came from a common ancestor. So I would say he has not demonstrated at all that there is any scientific evidence that a bat and a pine tree and an elephant and a squirrel are related, other than having similar DNA, which could just as well be the DNA code, the same author. If you look at all the books Mark Twain wrote, you'll notice that, thousands of similarities because they have the same author. If you look at all the books in the world that are written in English, you will notice all of them use the same 26 letters. Wow. What does that prove? That the books wrote themselves, or that that's the code? The code with which you write English is the 26 letters of the alphabet, and the code with which DNA is written is the same because we have the same author of this code, and his name is God, not some man. This is God himself, who will be the judge one day. So I'm trying to answer the question. He keeps asking it over different, but I think I have answered. I apologize. The law of monophilia that he keeps talking about is that they are always going to produce the same kind of offspring, and I agree. But yet he thinks a pine tree and an elephant have an ancestor. Therefore, somewhere along the line, that law didn't work.
I'm not sure.
Why would that law have not worked?
Yeah, I'm
Why
not
do you
sure
imagine
how that's kind of involved in that there, Kent.
Yeah, I mean, because you've said everything wrong here. I have never once, not one time, mixed kind with species, though you repeatedly have, and I have cautioned you against that. You ramble on about irrelevant ideas you don't understand, but you obviously have not answered my question once. Now, I will paraphrase that for you in a moment. But I first want to know the answer to the question I just asked. Where did that law not work? I mean, so we have according to one possibility that we actually know is a possibility, and the other one is not a possibility. we have an evolutionary possibility, and we have a common ancestor that is a single-celled eukaryote. Now, the first plants were also single-celled. The definition of mammal is when those cells combine into multicellular, and we've actually seen that occur directly in the lab, too. So even that level of macroevolution has been directly observed. So at what point did that rule of monophyly or law of monophyly break down?
You